I mean, I'm Jim Ski and I'm Working Group 3 co-chair. I would say, I think if you had a job description for a co-chair, the first bullet point would be herding cats and trying to get authors to work together. And so I can just say I'm full of admiration for Helene and Armor Revy, who's the other CLA, for herding the cats in this chapter, because it was a particular challenge to pull this one and make it coherent. You did an excellent job on it. Now, what I want to do is, with my remarks, just cover three topics very briefly, and they are feasibility, economics, and pointers to the sixth assessment report. So first of all, on the feasibility thing, there's one very important delegation here in Poland that will walk around and say what my policymaker wants to know is whether 1.5 degrees warming is feasible or not. They wanted the 1.5 report to tick the box, feasible or infeasible. And I should say that we were very determined not to tick either of these boxes when we came with the 1.5 report. But Helene showed the glossary definition of feasibility that was used, which referred to the feasibility of climate goals and response options. And actually feasibility can be applied in a different way depending on whether this is one macro concept that is about the feasibility of the overall system, or whether feasibility applies to individual response options. And Chapter 4 did a heroic effort on the feasibility of individual response options. I think what would be interesting to think about is how you think about feasibility at a larger scale when you put different response options together into portfolios, and think about the consequences of deploying options at scale, because I think the point is that scale really matters. And I'll give you a very specific example with BECCS. It's a controversial technology. So there's one plant operating in Illinois that's doing BECCS at full scale. So it's feasible. We know that it can be done. But on the other hand, we have scenarios that are showing the huge deployment of BECCS. And I can promise you that the fourth pathway that Helene showed uses bioenergy at a level 4 times the level of the sustainable bioenergy potential that's identified in Chapter 4. And I think we can perhaps be quite upfront and say, on the basis of the 6 kind of enabling conditions that were identified, whether pathways are feasible as well as individual response options are feasible. And I think that would be something that we need to think about for AR6. On the economics, a big issue here, I've had to present this report to policymakers back in the UK, and the first question they ask is, what does it cost? It's the first thing that a policymaker comes along and wants to know about. And it is actually quite difficult to present this report on some of the economic dimensions. But I know that the scenarios database that is now published via IASA, that anybody can look at, actually has indicators on investment costs, it has indicators on GDP loss, and it's got indicators on consumption loss. And we need to think carefully about how we present these, and whether they're feasible, whether it is feasible to present these in a coherent way that you can actually count on, and it makes consistent sense. So that, I think, is something that we need to think forward through for AR6. And I do wonder sometimes, Jean-Charles presented a set of, we've got it in paragraphs and in flowing text. Sometimes whether we could present this in tables and different ways to make this actually clearer to policymakers so that we can systematically compare different scenarios at different levels. And I think the table you did present was a good starting point for how to do that. I've got a personal bugbear about discounting and integrated assessment models and prices, but I'll probably leave that one. But just to say, I think there were lessons learned from way back in the second assessment report on the theory of economics and discounting, and these lessons are not applied in the integrated assessment models as they are at the moment. Thank you, Jan, for telling me that. Final point on pointers to AR6. The way that the 1.5 report was constructed, there was a Chapter 2 based on the integrated assessment models, and there was a Chapter 4 that did everything else in terms of bottom-up. So it was heroic of Helene and Arrow to actually take on so much ground in Chapter 4 and cover all of the different dimensions. Because in principle it had the same scope as the entire AR6, but was intended to be focused on 1.5 degrees. So it was really challenging, I think, to do this. But what I wanted to do is to flag to AR6 there's much more of an opportunity to break the content of Chapter 4 down and split it into different chapters and give it a more thorough and systematic treatment. So for example, we've broken the future into 2 timescales. So we have the long-term chapter, which will be like Chapter 2 was in the 1.5 report, but we also have a short to mid-term perspectives chapter, which can go much more detail into sectoral scenarios and pathways, national scenarios and pathways, which can provide a much richer set of material, I think. We also have a chapter on finance, which was the most difficult chapter to agree with governments when we actually scoped out the report. A big demand there was on the quantitative elements. What are the size of the investments needed? Where do financial flows need to go? So many of the things that Jean-Charles was starting to speak about, we need to draw out to a much, much bigger extent in AR6. And also the scoping includes the other elements, perhaps the more qualitative, institutional. How do you de-risk investments to make low carbon investments more credible? For the first time ever in IPCC, there's a separate chapter on technology, which I think is important. And I've just noticed that Jayashri Roy from India has popped her head round the door at the back, and she is CLA of a first ever chapter on behavioural issues, and the scoping of that document mentions very interesting words like culture, lifestyle, consumption, that IPCC has always been very cautious about in the past. So, I mean, I'm not only excited about the fact that 1.5 report has made a big impact, it's also providing a really good platform for the real AR6. And I think, Helene is going to be involved in the technology chapter, Jean-Charles on finance, Joashri at the back on behaviour. And so we really are getting quite excited at this stage about what we can do with the AR6 and have as big an impact with that as we have with the 1.5. So I'll finish there, thank you.
Thank you. And Ellen and Jean-Charles, if you can come here.